Hello, I'm Sayed. Today I'm in the kitchen, getting ready to make a popular Indian dessert, Gulab Jamun. Melt in your mouth balls of khova or dehydrated milk, steeped in sugar syrup, traditionally flavored with rose extract. Nowadays, Gulab Jamuns are usually made at home with a ready mix, or they're store-bought. With my recipe and streamlined process, you can make delicious, authentic Khova Jamuns in small or large quantities. I make 60 odd in an hour on a regular basis. For those of you who are unable to source good khova where you are, I have a couple of alternatives for you. I've organized this video to make it easier to follow. I'm going to show you my equipment quickly and then we'll get started. First, I'm going to start with the sugar syrup. It takes a little time to prepare. It is most efficient to make it in 2 pots. You'll see why as we go along. My syrup is quite thin to start with, and the water is 1.5 times the sugar. The flame can be high initially until the sugar dissolves and then keep it quite low. I add saffron for the flavor. You can also use cardamom or both, or if you want to be authentic, a few drops of rose extract. Now I'm going to switch to the other burner where I've kept the oil for deep frying. About 2 cups depending on the size of your kadai. Mine is 8.5 inches in diameter. Traditionally, ghee is used to fry the jamuns, but now oil is more common because it's much cheaper. While the oil is getting hot, we can start on the khova. As you can see, the khova is quite soft. This is how it should be, even when it comes out of the fridge. I'm going to use my mixie to process it. You can also use a food processor or just do it by hand. This is a bit harder, but quite doable. We need to make a soft, smooth, cohesive dough with the khova and a little flour or atta. All khova crumbs need to be broken down. The flour is just enough to bind the khova together. You don't need to put a lot of flour in this dough. I use 2 tablespoons of flour for 200 grams of khova, and that's usually plenty. This is how it comes out of the mixie. The crumbs are gone and making a ball is quite easy. Make 16 portions of the dough. This will yield jamuns about 1.5 inches in diameter. I find it much easier to divide my dough in powers of 2. First we divide the dough into 2 portions, then each half into 2 portions and the quarters and so on. And when you do it this way, all the portions may not be equal, but you can adjust that while rolling the balls. Some will be big and some will be small, so take out a little bit of dough from here and give it to the other. This is how I've ended up with 17 actually, because I didn't want to make them any bigger than this. Press down with your palms when you're rolling the jamun balls. This is not difficult, but a necessary step to make fluffy jamuns that do not fall apart in the oil. The balls should be smooth. They are just over 1 inch in diameter. You can get a view of my setup from here. The oil is heating. Over on the right, I'm rolling the balls and making the dough. The syrup is simmering on the left. Once the oil is hot, drop the balls into the oil. I can fit all 17 in my kadai at once. Keep the heat at medium or lower. The balls must cook all the way through without burning on the outside. Turn them over from time to time. The jamun should puff up a bit on frying. These authentic khova jamuns are the best in taste and texture, and the preparation is no more complicated than any other method. In fact, it's rather simple if you have the right tools and the right khova. There's no need to use a mix or anything. This whole process will take about 4 to 5 minutes, which is enough time to make the next batch of dough and roll the balls. One thing to remember, the bigger the balls, the longer it will take to fry. I find this 1-inch size is perfect for eating and for frying and preparation. When the jamuns are fried, take them out to drain on a paper towel. And we can put the next batch in. For the first couple of times you make jamun, check out a test ball to make sure it's cooked all the way through. After a few times, instinct will take over and there should be no problem. Depending on the size of your syrup pot, you can drop these into the syrup right now or wait for the second batch to be done. My syrup pot can hold about 1.5 batches, so I'm going to wait. While the second batch is frying, I can be starting on my third batch of dough. As you can see, this is like an assembly line of 3 steps. Make the dough and the balls, fry and drain, and drop in the syrup to cook. The cooking in the syrup part takes a little longer time. The other 2 steps take about the same amount of time. Hence, we need the 2 pots or 1 large pot that can hold 2 batches. I will put the whole timeline in the description box to make it all clear. Now I have 2 batches of fried jamun. Up until now, the whole process has only taken 20 minutes. For this video, I'm only making so many. I'm not making 60. But you can see how we could just continue with alternating the batches. Now, I'm going to put the jamuns in the syrup. Drop as many balls as will comfortably fit in the pot. The depth of the syrup should be such that they do not touch the bottom. This will ensure a round shape. Now that the syrup is bubbling furiously, I'm going to shift it onto the back burner and place it on low heat. And I'm going to move the second batch of syrup onto this side. My syrup is quite loose right now, as you can see. That's fine. In fact, that's how it should be, because it will thicken as the jamun simmer in it, and the thinner syrup will get absorbed better. If you start with a thick syrup, it will become too thick and the jamun too sweet. The remaining jamun will go into the second pot. Jamun and syrup can be taken off the flame after about 10 to 15 minutes. Transfer to another bowl along with some of the hot syrup, and let the jamun soak in for about 10 more minutes before serving. They will have cooled to a reasonable temperature too. The gulab jamuns are ready to go to the table. They were in the syrup for about 15 minutes. We shall check out this texture of the jamuns at the very end. Some tips and troubleshooting. Kitchen is all clean after the jamun is done. And I thought I will do this troubleshooting session here with my cheat sheet and my glasses whenever I need them. So I'm going to keep them. I thought I'll do it like a Q&A thing. What are the key things I should keep in my mind before starting on the jamuns? How many jamuns you need to make, and therefore how many batches of batches you will have. For example, in my case, which I showed you, each batch of khova was 200 grams, which makes 16 jamuns of whatever the size I wanted, 1.5 inches. But maybe your packet is 250 grams, so you can make a little more. So you should have an idea of that when you start. Once you know how many one batch can make, then you know how many batches you need to make. Based on that, the rest of the things will follow. How big or small should my kadai be? See, the bigger the kadai, the more oil we need. And once you fry, generally the oil is sort of wasted. So to be economical, and assuming that you have the time, because if otherwise, like the halwainis do, they just keep a huge kadai and a huge pot of syrup and they just keep putting the jamuns in there only. We can't do that. So we have to make these choices. What I would suggest if you're doing only one batch is to take a smaller kadai and fry it in 2 batches. If you use a smaller kadai, then you'll need less oil. It will just take 5 minutes longer because that's how long it takes to fry the dal. So if like me, I know that I'm going to make 4 batches, then I'll take a little bigger kadai and I fry at least 1 batch at a time. So I have 4 times to fry. And the oil doesn't get heated up too much and things like that.
1 big syrup pot or 2 small ones? And what size?
The one thing that decides the size of the syrup pot is obviously the size of your jamun and how many you are making. Let's say I'm frying 17 at a time. And I would like my syrup pot to fit at least 70 because the syrup portion is the longer time. It takes more than double the time to get out of that phase when I'm doing multiple batches. So that is one thing. If I'm making multiple batches, then as I did, I don't have room to keep too big a pot. So I kept 2 pots because I had 2 burners. If you have only 2 burners available to you, then in that case, if you're making 2 batches, ideally you would want it to hold both batches because making a new syrup without a 3rd burner takes a long time.
A little bit of troubleshooting now. Why are my jamuns falling apart when I drop them in the oil?
So there could be multiple reasons for this. One is maybe the dough didn't get fine enough and it was not cohesive enough. Or the ball was not smooth enough, like there's a crack in the ball, it will do the same thing. 3rd thing is if the oil is not hot enough, then too it will disintegrate because they'll just take too long in the oil and then the outside won't sort of get coated first and will just disintegrate in the oil. And I was forgetting the 4th reason is that if your dough is too loose. For example, if you're using milk powder, then we are kneading the dough with milk. And in that case, if you put a little more milk, the dough is very loose, then also it's likely to disintegrate. So what should you do in that case? One is you can just add more milk powder, which actually I did with my dough. Or you can add some more flour. The problem with the flour is that if you add too much flour, the jamun is going to get a little hard and syrup won't penetrate into it.
How will I know if the oil is the right temperature?
Drop the crumb in the oil. If the crumb is getting black, it's the oil is too hot. And if it's sort of not sizzling at all, the oil is too cold. That's just the general rule of thumb.
My jamuns are looking so good from the outside, but when I bite into them, they're undercooked.
But they're all dark brown from the outside. So it's like you can't cook them anymore in the oil, but they're not cooked all the way through, which means your oil was very hot. So if it is almost black outside and it's not cooked, then you don't want to do that. As soon as you put the jamun in, all the jamun in, let them sort of start browning and you should lower the heat a little bit if your oil is very hot. Tossing them on and off and let them slowly cook all the way in. You want them to be a really darker brown and cook all the way in. You have to keep it on even lower flame. So they take a longer time to do. I like to see a brown color on mine. I don't like them to be as dark as Khova Jamun. So that's one. And the other case where that can happen is with the milk powder. My milk powder, I realized afterwards, had a little bit of sugar in it. And that will definitely caramelize and it will brown faster than if you just had the milk powder or the Khova. So in that case too, you have to just watch out and just lower the flame once all the jamuns are in the oil.
These are looking very good from the outside, but the syrup hasn't reached all the way in.
All these steps we have followed. The kadai is the right size, the syrup is the right depth, the dough is proper, the jamuns have plumped up nicely. That means the dough doesn't have too much maida. Everything is fine. But still, when I put the jamun in the syrup and cook them and they come out, there is no syrup at the inside. So then one is that you just may not have cooked it long enough and maybe you need to do that longer. And the second is if your syrup is too thick, then it can't penetrate the jamun. So in that case, you'll have to thin down the syrup a little bit with water, bring it to a boil, and drop the jamun in again, cook for a little longer, and it'll just get. If it's still not doing it, then probably you had too much maida in your jamun.
And these are just yummy to taste, but they're looking a little wonky and misshapen.
And that is if they're either overcrowded in the syrup pot, or there isn't enough syrup for them to float nicely. that's when they lose their shape. And I make that trade-off a lot. If I'm just making jamun for home, I don't need them to be waterful, round in shape. We are all okay with them looking a little funny and still tasting good because I don't know what to do with all that extra syrup. You need a lot of syrup for it. But if somebody's coming or I have to show you how to make it, then I will take the extra syrup, right? So that's again a choice you have to make. Those are the things I could think of that could go wrong. The rest, it's very simple actually, the procedure. Once you get the hang of it, you will be doing it like this. And whether you do it with the khova or with the milk powder, which you will see, I've already let out what the alternative was, they will be fine. You make some mistakes maybe, and then you know how you should correct them. Let's now get on with the alternatives for not having store-bought khova.
Now the milk powder jamun. Milk powder usually has much less fat than the khova. So I'm going to compensate for this using ghee and fresh cream. Add the flour and mix the ghee, flour and the milk powder in until you have coarse crumbs. Then add the cream and the milk to make a dough. This is a half cup measure and I have used about half of the milk. This dough is quite easy to knead and does not need a mixie or a food processor. You can just do this by hand quite easily. But it has become a little wet because I have added slightly more milk than I needed to. And I'm going to add some milk powder to compensate for that. And the dough is still sticky because it has some water content from the milk. Some dry flour on my palms to knead will do the trick. This dough is 1.5 times my one batch of khova dough. I have therefore 24 jamuns. The rest of the process is much the same. The only thing is, I have discovered that my milk powder has a small amount of sugar. So these jamuns are going to become a little bit darker than the other ones because of the caramelization of the sugar. Other than that, there is no appreciable difference in the process. I'll just run through the rest of it. And oh, by the way, these milk powder jamuns are no different from using a ready mix in terms of the method, but they are better because you know what went in it. Just milk powder and a teensy bit of flour. We can compare the textures of the two jamuns. This first one is the one made with khova. You can see it's very soft, breaks apart easily, it's slightly grainy, and the syrup has gone all the way in. And this one is the milk powder one. And it looks pretty good too. Soft and grainy. The taste will be a little bit different. The verdict at home is that the khova is better, but the milk powder is pretty good too. And of course, everything disappeared in no time at all. The second option is for the enterprising ones among you, where you make your own khova. The process is simple, but long and requires a lot of patience. I'm going to show you the whole process. It yields excellent khova. The khova freezes well, so you can make small batches whenever you have the time and collect it in the freezer. That's it for the khova, it's all done. 1.5 liters of milk took 1 hour and 40 minutes to make 238 grams of khova. You can make about 20 jamuns with it.
So that's it for Gulab Jamun. I think that was my longest video. But I do hope that you're now equipped with the recipe and the troubleshooting tips to hop into the kitchen and whip up some. Do let me know how your experience is when you do that. Next, you can check out my gajar halwa video. Another one of my favorites and a little bit different from the traditional recipes. I'll see you next week. Thank you for watching.